All right. Hello everyone, and welcome to the MakerDAO Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting number 105, taking place on Thursday, August 13th, 4 p.m. UTC. My name is LongForWisdom. I'm one of the governance facilitators for MakerDAO. I'm joined by a bunch of MakerDAO people, 33 so far, and counting. Cool. So, as always, feel free to interrupt and speak during this call. Don't be shy. I will go briefly over the agenda. We're going to have a little bit of a strange ordering today because some of our presenters have to, or one of our presenters needs to leave early, so we're going to put Lev up early in the call. So on the agenda today, we've got domain updates. We're going to have Lev talk about MIP 20. We're going to have the MIPs updates. I'm going to do the MIPs inclusion review. We're going to have governance at a glance. We're going to have Monet Supply speak about the Vault compensation plan and the updates to it. And then we're going to have Vishesh do State of the Peg later on, as usual, as well. Cool. So yeah, I think we're going to dive straight into the domain updates. So let's start with smart contracts. Do you guys have anything you want to talk about? I think there's been some stuff going on of late.
Yes, let me jump in here and hopefully you can see me. So as you know, we have the liquidations 1.2 update that we talked about, I believe, last week. And if somebody can post in chat, you know, there was a forum post. Oh, thank you. Very quickly, what that does, it puts a cap on the total amount of DAI that can be in liquidation at the same time. We think that this is a good thing to have, and I believe the community reacted favorably to it. What we are going to do as the smart contracts team is take another week to you know, further analyze the code and write more tests. Initially, we were a little bit optimistic, and maybe we said, yeah, let's have that for next Friday. But you know, looking at the ecosystem right now, you know, everything that's been going on, I think we are nobody would mind if we actually take an extra week to, you know, do extra testing to show these tests to the community. Maybe there are more people that want to look at our solution. So that is the first item that I wanted to talk about, that we're not going to go with it this weekend. The second one I wanted to address 101 LRs. What is that? Does 1.2 enable? Oh, no. And the other thing I wanted to address was the failed spell from last week, the one that that reduced the WBTCA debt ceiling to 0. And in fact, this was not unlike what happened with the AMs, right? There was a mismatch in the units, and so it was pretty serious. The good thing is that the bug worked in our favor this time, so it could have been the other way and you know, increase the debt ceiling to a astronomically large number. In this case, the debt ceiling was already reached. The only thing that happened is that it could create new DAI from WBTC almost exactly as it was before, and then a new spell came out and fixed it. But that did prompt us in the smart contracts team to be more thorough with our reviews. So we're going to be sharing shortly all of the steps that we're going to be taking to ensure that this doesn't happen again. I think this is the speaking personally, right? We got a little bit complacent, just week after week of Thursday afternoon. We got the results of the polls. We do a spell, do a review, and then deploy on Friday. I don't want to get too much into this, but maybe the community should talk about if this, the length of time that the smart contracts team has to write the spells, if it is sufficient, because it is, under 24 hours. And this also doesn't really give the community itself enough time to review the spells, right? But rest assured that we're adding to our methodology to ensure that this doesn't happen again, right? And yeah, expect more in the forums. And if anybody is, in the community is somewhat technical and is up for reviewing the spells, then please do so. And I think that is all I have. I don't want to stretch too much. All and right. We can continue in chat or, just ping me. But yeah, that was my update.
All right, thank you very much, Mariano. Cool, let's move on to oracles. Nick, have you got anything?
So pretty quiet this week. I did have TBTC reach out to basically they want to swipe or swap the contract that they have whitelisted because they're gearing up for another release candidate. So expect to see them post a proposal probably later next week.
Okay. Is that everything?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, risk. Cyrus, anything you want to add or speak about?
No real updates from our end. We've been so we put out the loopring evaluation last week, and then this week we've just been strategizing for liquidations 1.2 parameters and also kind of reviewing some other general system parameters, things like circuit breaker, and then what else? I think that's about it for us. I don't think there's any big update from us. Oh, and then we're still waiting on a few last minute things to put out USDT tether and PAX MIP 12 submissions, and then likewise the same for Chainlink or Link.
Cool. Thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I think we'll have Lev and the discussion around MIP 20 now, and we'll come to MIPs and governance-y things afterwards. So Lev, are you happy to discuss? I can't remember, you said you didn't have slides, is that correct?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I don't have slides, and it's not so much a presentation because I don't think it's really a good use of time to just go through the MIP, and instead I would like to invite a discussion about the most important issues that people feel about this MIP in order to sort of move it along in the process a little bit and see where it should go, given that it's in the RSC phase right now. So just to start on that, for background, we're talking about MIP 20, which is called Target Price Adjustment Module. You might have heard of this as negative interest rates, which is sort of the one phrase description of what it is. And obviously it's proposed sort of in the wake of the issues with the PEG and the limitations of monetary policy around the zero rates kind of lower bound that we're currently subjected to. I would just like to kind of highlight a few things about this MIP before proceeding with the discussion. The first thing is that this is a technical MIP. This is not a, well, actually, I'm not sure what the other kind of MIP is, but basically, this is a technical MIP that would give governance the option to adjust the PAR parameter in the system, which is what decides how how much for accounting purposes one DAI is worth in USD, which can be used as a mechanism to affect, effective negative interest rates, which is currently not possible. However, there is support in the core for adjusting the USD value of a DAI in the system, which is why it's possible to make this MIP and technically make this modification without changing the core system. So this is just a very lightweight, small component, and I'm sure that any of the sort of people who are familiar with the smart contracts would agree with me that it's technically speaking, it's not an intrusive change. So of course you cannot completely separate technical considerations and kind of general governance considerations in the system. So I'm not claiming that because it's a technical MIP, there's nothing to discuss outside of the technical. Obviously, we still need to decide whether or not this is something the governance would potentially want to use and what the ramifications of that would be. However, some things are out of scope for this MIP and should be in scope for some further non-technical MIP that would set governance abstractions and governance expectations and processes for actually using this functionality. So, effectively, this gives you the technical tools to create negative interest rates, but how you would actually use negative interest rates and how that sort of modifies our current monetary policy process is kind of up for discussion. And obviously, it is possible to implement this MIP and not make use of it, but it's it'd obviously be ridiculous to say that we should consider technical MIPs on technical merits only or something like that. So the next thing is just that technically the changes proposed in this MIP are, I would say, quite well understood, because target price adjustment was actually part of the plan for multilateral DAI for a very long time. So if you actually look in the purple paper, for example, or in earlier implementations of multilateral DAI, they actually included a module which would adjust the target price of DAI. So this is not a new invention. This is just an implementation of something that's kind of been in the folklore for a while. Additionally, what a lot of people don't know is if you look in Psi, in our previous iteration, single collateral DAI, that actually had a target price adjustment module built into it from the beginning, which was actually just dormant because the parameter was set to 0. So it wasn't actually doing any target price adjustment, but it was actually always there. So that code was actually sort of live. And this is just worth keeping in mind, just to sort of sanity check, the technical sort of implementation of the idea that this is quite a well-known thing, and there's already been quite a lot of discussions of it. And there's also been posts in the forum about TRFM, which is the kind of the old way of thinking about target price adjustment, where it would be adjusted according to some algorithm. And now I'd like to just address the main difference between TRFM, which is the sort of more established meme, and what's proposed in MIP 20, which is TPAM, target price adjustment module, instead of target rate feedback module. And the only difference is that target price adjustment is just a simpler version of target rate adjustment. And what it does is it allows governance to directly set a rate parameter which adjusts the target price of DAI at a continuous rate over time, compared to TRFM, which is a sort of dynamic mechanism that tries to look at the market price of DAI and feeds it back into monetary policy and tries to adjust the rate of change of the price of DAI dynamically based on that. So I think TRFM is actually really a vastly more complicated thing, which is a lot more difficult to study. And TPAM is like a very simple version of it, which just allows us to set a fixed price adjustment rate, similarly to how we set a fixed stability fee today. We don't have any special algorithms for automatically adjusting the stability fee in real time. We just say it's going to be 2%, or it's going to be 4%, or it's going to be 0%. Similarly, this would allow you to set a fixed rate, same sort of units, 0%, you can make it positive, 2%, you can make it negative, minus 2%, and that's the rate at which the price of DAI will adjust. If you look at actual MIP, there's obviously more details and discussion of why that's effectively equivalent to, or can be used to kind of create effective negative interest rates. Last comment about motivation. As I kind of said in the beginning, where monetary policy has this that we're currently enacting has this zero lower bound where we're not able to decrease stability fees on a collateral type below 0, even though we're able to use these negative base rates. The base rate is just an abstraction that allows you essentially to set the stability fee to be lower than the risk premium on a collateral type. It isn't actually a negative interest rate. And negative interest rates are a little bit tricky. They're a little bit of a special case because we can't really claw back DAI from people who are holding it, right, without basically, well, firstly making changes to the core system and also really messing with how tokens work. And I think that everyone agrees that would be a terrible idea. So instead, we need something like TPAM, which accomplishes a negative interest rate by changing the price of DAI. So and I'm happy to answer questions about that if that's not clear, but that's the main idea. And obviously, this is also the most controversial thing about this proposal, is because it does create sort of a departure from the world where people think of the target price of DAI as always being $1. Instead, the target price of DAI would be some value which was adjusting in real time based on whatever governance had set the interest rate to, if they were using it. And if they were using it to enact negative interest rates, then it would be a negative rate. So the target price of DAI would be slowly going down from $1, and this would presumably be used as a monetary policy tool to deal with situations like what we have today, where the sort of market equilibrium for DAI, even at zero effective rates, is still not doing with the price what we want, and DAI is still trading above the target. So with this, I'd like to stop talking and invite sort of questions and what people see as the main, if anything about it is unclear, or if people see as the main discussion points here, because there's been good discussion in the forum, but I think given that this MIP is in the RFC phase, and I think the recommendation for non-emergency MIPs in the RFC phase, like this one is, I think it's important to give it adequate time for discussion. So it's been in this phase for about a month, and I think we kind of should continue to have this discussion for as long as we see necessary, but definitely, for example, another month or two, so that everyone is, so all the points have been covered. So this would be a good time to start. So please, questions.
Hey, Lev, thank you for that. I just want to chime in, Brian from the smart contracts team. I've looked over the box, and I just want to second what Lev said, that it's a very simple implementation. It just tacks onto the existing system and uses the existing handles to make changes. Technically, it's not, I don't think it would be very controversial. So I think the discussion would probably be around, do we want to change the par value of DAI?
I have a technical question about the implications for implementers of this, people that have made, and possibly even in our code or informal verification at some point, if we've ever made bad assumptions on DAI always being $1 rather than doing the calculation of, DAI and par. So I wasn't sure if there would be, some rough edges on integrations, especially sort of immutable contracts that are already out there that may have made this bad assumption.
That's a good question. So when it comes to our system, when it comes to MakerDAO, to my knowledge, there's never an assumption that one DAI is worth $1. Instead, this par value is always carefully used, or at least that was the intention. So you shouldn't see like one somehow hard coded anywhere, and that would be a bug even today when we're not adjusting par. I would see that as a bug. In particular, like one of the places where it's used is in the global settlement module, and you'll see there that it kind of carefully calls par from the spotter to make sure that that we're actually respecting the correct redemption value of DAI. And I'm not aware of any other places where that needs to be considered. But but I think your question is mainly about other integrations for which it's impossible to say, of course, because we don't know what they all are. So I think it would be interesting if people could find examples of other projects that are relying on DAI for whom this would be a problem. And also we have to remember that this is a monetary policy tool, and the goal of which is to reduce the purchasing power volatility of DAI, right? Like that's the goal of monetary policy, is to ultimately make DAI's price more predictable and less volatile. While the target price of DAI adjusting away from $1 is a level of an unpredicted change that you could see as volatility, right? Ultimately, it's done with the goal of reducing volatility. And when we're not able to reduce volatility with conventional, monetary policy that we have available today, we're also failing in that job, right? So basically, like these other integrations that might be affected by this, aren't they also hurt by having DAI trade at 101 or 102, like it does today? So it's important to sort of distinguish between integrations that rely on DAI being stable, and the goal is certainly for those sorts of integrations to be helped, right, not hindered by this, because ultimately the goal of using negative interest rates is to stabilize DAI, compared to integrations that actually assume that the internal accounting value of DAI in MakerDAO is $1, which is the thing that we're actually sacrificing, or the thing that we're actually changing. So that's kind of a subtle distinction, but personally, I'm not aware of other systems that make an assumption about MakerDAO's internal accounting value of DAI.
I have one question. Is this reversible? I think I'm under the impression that once you trigger this and DAI starts free floating, you can't really, have a do-over and say we want to go back to the old system. Is that accurate or not?
I'm very glad you asked this, because there's actually there's a feature in this MIP which is new, which I didn't mention. It's documented in the MIP itself, which is not present in things like TRFM, which is sort of prior existing stuff, and that's the ability to set a target price cap. And the reason that I am proposing that this be included is that it actually allows you to backpedal out of this target price adjustment later if we want to. And the way that works in practice is, in addition to setting, let's say we want to do negative interest rates, so we start off by, we add this thing and we set the target price adjustment to be minus 2% per year. That's effectively a 2% negative interest rate on DAI. We can also set a target price cap of $1, which is the current target price. Later, let's say let's say monetary policy is in a different situation, and now we're actually able to normalize rates to be positive again, right? Like, let's say maybe the farming mania kind of stops, or we start actually generating a lot of DAI from new real world asset collateral types and so on, and then we actually start setting positive rates again. Well, then we'll have the ability to set a positive target price adjustment rate, and combined with this $1 cap, what that will mean is that as soon as the target price of DAI again comes back to $1, and this is assuming that we will actually have the positive interest rates kind of back on for long enough that we would actually kind of regain that lost ground. When it gets to $1, it will actually get capped at exactly $1. And then you can switch off the target price adjustment. And then essentially you'll be back where you started. And DAI will be, the target price of DAI will be exactly $1, not like 99.99 with some, with some decimal junk. It would be exactly $1. Which means that if you wanted to have target price adjustment be positive in the future, it allows you to walk it back and pretend that this is all a bad negative rates dream kind of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So basically, if it drifts below and then it drifts back up, you can just cap it once it hits. It's like a barrier that once it gets to it, it freezes in place. Exactly,
and then if we set target rate adjustment at that point, it would stop doing anything. If we set it to 0, it would be like we'd never done anything. It would just be inert. So we would be back, in the situation we are now. Obviously, this assumes that if in the future we have positive rates, we would prefer to just basically go back to $1 and then stop doing this target price adjustment stuff, rather than enacting positive rates through positive target price adjustment. That remains to be seen, but there's strong reason to believe that that's preferable, right?
You mean positive target price adjustment above $1, right?
Yeah, I'm saying that we probably don't want to do positive target price adjustment above $1. Yeah. We would rather, given today's kind of status quo, I would assume that we would want to go back to just using stability fees. And that's what this cap achieves. And this is the biggest difference between this proposal, and one of the important differences between this proposal and saying something like, let's implement TRFM. If we commit to implementing TRFM, that truly is like a path where we basically we don't have a clear way to come back to $1. That's really sort of wandering off into the into space. This proposal is sort of is intended to address this concern by giving us a way back.
All right. Okay, sorry to cut the discussion short, but we've got a whole bunch of other things we need to go through this meeting as well. So thank you, Lev, for discussing that, and everyone for their comments. I would suggest if you have further comments or further questions, you ask them on MIP20 on the forum post, which we've linked several times. Yeah, so thank you all. All right. Okay, I think we'll move onto MIPs. We'll start with governance. I'll do governance quickly, and then we'll go through MIPs. Cool. Okay. So active discussions this week. There's been some discussion around the liquidation system 1.2 upgrades that Mariano discussed earlier. There's a forum thread about that where Charles kind of describes what it is and how it will kind of change the liquidation system. I'd encourage everyone to read that if you haven't already. Some other interesting discussions. We had Seb Ventures creates a kind of sort of a write-up and kind of poll around the benefits of Maker acquiring strategic reserves to aid in monetary policy, where he laid out some kind of pros and cons and kind of discussed the idea of it, which I thought was quite interesting, and I'd encourage people to kind of read and comment on. And one other discussion thing I wanted to kind of mention was that we had a collateral onboarding call, or a collateral call yesterday, run by Lucas and Leah from Centrifuge. And I think like we had two potential collateral partners presenting. I think it was New Silver and Matt Rabinowitz discussed his company and his kind of proposal, which I think was super interesting. The recording is either available soon or is either available now or will be soon, and there'll be a summary written at some point as well. Yeah, I'm aware like not everyone has time to come to like 2 meetings every week or like multiple meetings a week. But if you have a spare second and want to kind of learn a bit about how we might add like real estate as collateral on Maker, I would give it a watch. Cool. So yeah, so it is on YouTube now. Cool. So seeking consensus, signal request wise, Hexnauts, Sam McPherson proposed adding a DAI flashmint module, which was kind of received fairly well, to the point where we actually stopped the signal request and moved it to a MIP13 declaration of intent, which is currently on the forum. So I'd encourage people to kind of read that over and discuss kind of the merits and potential downsides of flashminting, which is pretty exciting. And then we had three signal requests or 3 polls which are on chain starting Monday. We had the dust parameter increase, the BATE risk premium increase, and the surplus auction buffer increase. All of them passed the on-chain poll and will proceed to the executive this week. Cool, I think that covers governance at a glance. So let's move on to Charles. Can you give us any MIPS updates?
Yes. Could you grant me screen
Yes,
abilities?
I can. So find your name in the list. There you are.
Thanks.
Cool, go ahead.
Okay. So this week is a little bit of a shorter update due to some time constraints, but I will include all the other details with recent MIPS activity, working group stuff, other proposals and requests for comments, and so on in the weekly MIPS update I post on the forums. This one is just more about the immediate steps for this week, last week, and collateral onboarding. So this week we saw, as Long mentioned, the 3 inclusion polls for the sub-proposals. It went out on Monday and just concluded 30 minutes ago. The results were that core personal onboarding of Richard Brown, governance facilitator, passed, so that can proceed to the governance poll next Monday. The declarations of intent for forward guidance posted by Akiva also passed, but the LRC collateral onboarding work requirements and ended up getting rejected by quite a big difference. So those are the results, and today Long will confirm those ones that pass and that they will be included in the governance poll the following Monday. So next week's activity is the governance poll will be live with those 2 sub-proposals on Monday, and it will run for 3 days ending on Thursday at noon EST as usual, and Long will then confirm the results of the governance poll to decide what will be included in the final monthly MIPS executive vote occurring on Monday, or August 24th. In terms of collateral onboarding, so as I mentioned, LRC was rejected to continue through the monthly cycle. Additionally, through the weekly cycle, we could be seeing Tether and PaxUSD once the risk evaluations have been published. The actual dates are to be determined. The community greenlight polls for August governance cycle will go on a Monday, and there is a total of 12 polls, as you can see in this image here. So that's quite a lot of polls for Monday, but definitely encourage anyone to vote if they think that they want these collateral types to be onboarded to the Maker protocol. That is the end of this presentation. But like I mentioned, I'll be doing the forum post with a lot more details regarding all the progress on the MIPS and sub-proposals and RFC phase conception, etc., and as well as the working group updates for MIP 17 debt ceiling adjustments. But yeah, that's it for today. Thanks.
I want to make one comment. So I feel like
Yeah, go for it.
I could say something about the loopring evaluation being rejected, but it's kind of hard to say anything when is kind of one large Maker whale voter who voted against it, and isn't really a good conduit for public feedback from anonymous voters. So I kind of don't want to speculate actually on why it was rejected. But I think it would be an interesting discussion on if there's some way to solicit feedback from people regarding votes. Yeah, I'm not really sure what, like if there was a particular part of the evaluation that was not received well, or I mean, I'm really not interested in like speculating on what one person was thinking, but
Yeah, this is a problem we've kind of seen before, where it's kind of difficult for kind of large Maker holders to give feedback in an anonymous way, I guess, or when voting. So hopefully we're going to see some kind of more systemic fixes or kind of mitigations for that issue. For LRC, like specifically, I think, I mean, again, like you, I kind of don't really want to speculate. The point that it was kind of like just one whale who voted no kind of, again, points towards the, the importance of voting in the inclusion polls, especially if you feel, if you feel sort of strongly about the assets in question. It's possible that the kind of the rest of the Maker holders kind of looked at it and sort of said, well, I don't care that much about LRC, and just didn't vote, which is unfortunate, but not necessarily, surprising. Just because voting is a bit of a pain and gas prices have been quite high. So yeah. All right, I guess I'll briefly breeze through the MIPS conclusion review, just to kind of confirm what Charles said. The MIP 13 C3 sub-proposal 1 declaration of intent for forward guidance passed the inclusion poll, and we will be included in next week's kind of governance bundle poll, as well the sub-proposal for offboarding Richard Brown as governance facilitator. So yeah. All right, cool. Okay, so that covers most of the domain updates. We had Lev. So cool. Monet, are you available to talk about vault compensation?
Yes, I am ready and available. Am I audible right now?
I'll find you and give you the presentation powers.
Yep.
Right, you should be good to go.
Okay, one moment. Alrighty. All right, so just giving a quick update on the vault compensation plan and kind of the status where we're at right now. I'll repost the presentation as well, so everyone can just read over this later. Up to this point, so we've had an initial vote on April 6th, which had about 2/3 support in favor, with about 100,000 MKR voting. Our first vault compensation plan attempt had a lot less participation, and then also ended up about 25K MKR against versus 17 in favor. So since then, there have been a lot of people participating in the forums, giving some really valuable feedback. There's probably stuff that I missed or I'm not including here, but some of the stuff that jumped out to me was that potentially the plan was just too long, too many steps. Compensating in DAI might be suboptimal for some reasons, like just generally it's going to impact liquidity when we already have like a little bit of a credit crunch. And then also just overall participation, I think, was probably lower than I expected, probably same for a lot of people. So just figuring out how to get better turnout, hopefully close to the 100K plus that we had for the first vote back in April. So that being said, myself and then the rest of the working group collaborated on some potential changes to the plan going forward. First of which, basically paying out the vaults to be compensated in MKR tokens instead of in DAI. The idea there is that we won't need to run flops, so we don't take the price risk on like how much that MKR is going to be worth, or are we going to be tanking the price? And then also vaults, if they don't want to hold the MKR after being compensated, they can just sell it directly for ETH or for whatever their asset of choice is. They don't need to impact DAI liquidity as they're exiting if they choose to do that. So that's one change in the plan. The prospective rate that I had landed on to suggest is basically trying to match it up with the flop auctions and the clearing price from those back in March. Which I believe was around 250 DAI per MKR roughly. If anyone else has other opinions on a fair reference price in that regard, of course, hop on the forums. Next up, so basically just trying to like eliminate as many steps as possible. So these last two bullet points on this slide basically just, I think the previous plan involved like 2 or 3 executive votes and like 4 or 5 polls, something like that. This plan slims it down a lot, trying to reduce governance overhead, I think is probably the most important factor there. So just to run through the revised stages really quickly, and they're also in that forum thread as well, but phase 0, which is where we're currently at, basically just getting community feedback and then doing a little bit of final work on our end about figuring out what our operating costs are going to be to put this plan into action. Phase 1, this is kind of the meatiest part of the plan here. So in the previous vault compensation plan, there were a lot of different parameters that MKR holders were choosing. In this plan, we kind of slimmed down the options a little bit. So mainly they're just choosing what percentage of vault compensation level that they're okay with. And then the other difference with this first poll is that it consolidates the approval for the plan itself with deciding the level of compensation. My reason for wanting to do it this way is that there were no votes in the last time, which prevailed, but it was tough to tell whether they fell into like these last two bullet points, which one, whether they just opposed compensating vaults on principle, or whether they in principle are supporting of compensating vaults, but they just didn't like the way that the plan was set up, or for one reason or other, they didn't like it for some other reason. So that is phase one. Not going to go over this slide, but basically just some revised examples of how the calculation works. And then phase two, after MKR holders have either approved or rejected the plan and then decided the compensation level, is basically going to push it to an executive vote to approve MKR for paying the compensation claims at the percent that MKR holders decided, and then also for DAI, which will be used for paying operating expenses like developing the smart contract used for dispersing the compensation. Bullet point here is just that potentially this could be split up where the DAI request for funding for operating expenses might end up going before the MKR funding, just because are we going to be able to get a developer that's willing to put in work without funding actually being approved already? So this is a little bit up in the air. And then the prospective claims process, same as last plan, was 90 days, after which point governance is free to basically self-destruct the contracts, take any DAI back that wasn't needed for OpEx, and then burn any unclaimed maker that wasn't claimed. That's basically a wrap. I have some references, so again, I'll post this to the Vault Compensation Plan V2 thread, and then if anybody has any questions they want to go over, feel free.
So if you guys lose the next vote on this, are you just going to keep kind of like putting votes to governance, or like at what point do we just say maybe this is not what we want to do?
So the setup for phase one, I was trying to hopefully be able to see if we're gonna like fish or cut bait. If we get decent turnout and oppose current or the 0%, like just in principle, I don't support vault compensation. If that goes through with good turnout, I think we're done. Particularly if it's like more than like 60,000 that voted in favor of vault compensation back in April. If it gets to the last bullet point, the oppose plan, but like supported in principle, that's where it gets a little bit tougher. And I mean, I think if that ends up getting more than 50% support, whomever is the driving force behind voting for that should probably get in touch and propose a plan of their own.
Does anybody in the community know if there's still ongoing, you don't have to comment on this, but is there still ongoing litigation with regards to the Maker Foundation?
Pretty certain there is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Guys, can I get my 2 minutes here?
Yeah, go for it, please.
So hopefully you guys can hear me well. I just wanted to say, however this goes, wherever people sit, we really need a strong signal one way or another on this. We kind of, to my mind, this is something we've kind of worked on as a group. I think people are thinking about. We don't really have a clear signal that this is important to settle one way or another, and we really want that signal, whichever way it goes. So that's my first point. Second point is that we kind of changed the method to be this DAI method. And so when you look at the numbers as the percents, no vault is going to get that actual percent as in collateral compensation, even with the MakerDAO numbers at 250. So when you see like 6% and you vote for that, no vault's going to get 6% back, just the way that the compensation that we altered this. And so if you wanted to give them 6% back, you'd vote for 12. Okay. And so it's just a detail here that the way the numbers come up, the way that we're doing it, the reason why we do it is a difference between what they got back and what we want to give them is because if they already got F back, they've already got the ride up and they've had some of their stuff back. But if they got nothing, then the question is kind of how much do they really get? And then these numbers don't really reflect that. What they reflect is an attempt by picking a number to distribute the compensation that would be distributed kind of fairly across all the people that didn't get that percentage back. That's all it does. And so those are the 2 points. And I really want to encourage kind of voter turnout. I know transaction fees are high. I will be voting my tiny amount of Maker just because I think this signal we need to, would like to see an executive level of Maker participation on this, just to lay it to rest one way or another. Thank you, guys.
All right, yeah. Yeah, thank you, MakerMan and Money Supply for that. Like, I'm just going to kind of briefly reiterate what I guess both Monet and MakerMan have said, just to kind of round the point home. Yeah, we're getting to the point where this is kind of just like dragging on, and we need to know clearly whether it is something that people still want or if it is something that people have now realized, you know, it isn't worth the trouble. And I think either direction is fine, but we, as the other said, we kind of really need that clarity, because otherwise it's just going to keep like dragging on, right? And until we get that clarity, this issue isn't going to like just go away, really, because, you know, everyone is, I mean, the conversation, the affected vault holders are still sort of complaining in the forum. You know, there's not really a justification to just drop it completely without a vote that says so because of the initial vote, which voted in favor. So we kind of really need a signal that kind of, you know, that can kind of direct, like, sort of, or can help us kind of get a clear direction going forwards. Yeah, so I would thank you all for keeping that in mind. MakerMan, do you want to say that last point on the call? MakerMan, do you want to say that on the recording as well?
Sure. So it was the last point that I forgot. The reason why we chose Maker in the end was partially a suggestion in the forums. And secondly, given the state of the DAI peg, to do this in DAI or to buy F or anything crazy, we're just going to end up driving the peg up. And so kind of when you look at the effective dilution here, depending on what you guys pick, it's really low, literally below. It should be on the order of 1% or lower, depending. And so it just seemed easier to hand these guys Maker and let them exchange as they kind of come through versus trying to drop kick on the markets, however much Maker to raise DAI to then for them to buy F in. It's like, give them Maker, let them buy F, do whatever. So we just thought it would be easier for governance since we can mint Maker, at least according to C. Mooney. It's kind of an easy out, and the effective dilution wherever we go on this is going to be on the order of 1%, give or take, or less, depending. So it just seemed easiest. That's it from me, guys.
All right, thank you again. Does anyone have any questions or comments on vault compensation? Maybe spend sort of 8 minutes on this.
If nobody has questions, y'all better vote.
Yes, I would encourage everyone to vote.
Do you think there's a possibility that maybe some people, especially myself, Americans, don't want to get involved because of the ongoing litigation? And would anybody here know that if that litigation goes through, you know, do we consider these people double dipping? They're going to get compensated by the community and by the courts?
The compensation plan, I mean, basically as part of claiming compensation, people will go through a UI, where they e-sign a disclaimer saying that they're not going to sue Maker or the foundation. Whether that's enforceable, probably not. But just in principle, as part of claiming compensation, people are attesting that they won't do that. But legally, they probably still could. Or maybe not.
Okay, it doesn't sound like there's any other urgent questions. So yeah, I would again encourage people to kind of read over the plan on the forum. We'll organize a poll for it probably in the next couple of weeks. We'll make sure the poll lasts longer this time. The previous one was 3 days. That was probably a little short. So we're going to probably push it up to something like 2 weeks, like in the same way as the collateral onboarding calls. So yeah, expect that coming in the next few weeks, I think, unless there's any like major changes that are suggested. Cool. Okay. Let's move on. Cyrus, did you want to like briefly come back to that thing that you wanted to say earlier?
Which thing?
ETH A, ETH B, etc.
Oh, right. Yeah, I just forgot to round out my update in that we're also working on ETH B collateral type with a lower liquidation ratio, as well as some ETH A risk modeling work. But there wasn't really much there. It's just a very mini PSA.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. It's important to communicate that this stuff is still being worked on, right? Because it's yeah, cool. All right, so with that, I think we can move on to Rashesh and State of the Peg, and then get into some QA and or discussion. Rashesh, are you good?
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So just at a high level, the DAI supply. So we're looking at a little over 300 million DAI from ETH, about 2.7 from BAT, about 50 million from USDC, and about 67 million from WBTC. So as far as the ETH supply goes, basically this is continued to grow, although I think you can track basically spikes and plateaus in the rate of growth, which kind of correlate to different yield farming opportunities. So we saw this sort of continuing base linear trend, and then we saw a bit of a spike when some of the initial yield farming opportunities started to crop up. And then those leveled out a bit, and then there was a massive acceleration with a lot of the Wi-Fi type opportunities. And basically in the last week or so, that has slowed again a bit. So things, could potentially reach somewhat of a steady state. I don't think any of the recent projects, announcements, activities in the last week have been too crazy in terms of DAI farming, or at least compared to say 3-4 weeks ago. So that's something we'll have to continue to watch as more of these opportunities continue to crop up. As far as USDC, I mean, the USDC DAI supply since mid-July has been fluctuating a bit day to day. So it seems that it's heavily used by individual large users making potentially short-term transactions. But the long-term supply that's minted has kind of stayed a bit on the higher end, around 50 million. So again, trending upward, but very, very spiky. So I have to continue to watch that. WBTC. So this wasn't quite completely capped out. There's still, say 13 million room in the debt ceiling there, but it does have this sort of stepwise usage. So again, a few large users that initially kept capping it out. It seems that the amount minted is still sitting around 66 million, but that's not been capped out this time. So that's something to keep in mind. Is unclear if that is the amount of demand that's currently there for minting DAI from WBTC, and it's been met, or if this would continue to rise, giving it a little bit more time because it's only been a couple of days. So again, we'll have to watch that. As far as BAT, so let's back up here. Basically, there is not a lot of usage, and then a couple million in usage, and then small fluctuations in between. But it's more or less kind of sitting close to 3 million DAI minted from BAT. Not a huge margin, but it's seeing decent percentage-wise utilization of that debt ceiling. So probably managed well. As far as the collateral portfolio, so what we've seen is the ETH collateral portfolio has gotten a bit less risky, but also ETH price has gone up. So in nominal terms, it feels users have not done much with their collateral there, but naturally their collateralization has been pushed up. There's a huge wall that's kind of nestled. Actually, I'll talk about the walls down here. So basically, if you look at around an ETH price of 240, you'd be liquidating 133 million DAI. So this is your largest wall. Probably the biggest thing to sort of keep in mind, manage against. There's smaller walls around 285, and 330 is not even worth mentioning. So I would say around an ETH price of 285, you'd want to be pretty decently concerned, because even given a 400 plus million DAI supply, a 33 million liquidation is probably still pretty significant for the amount of market liquidity out there. To look at the BTC. So another thing to sort of keep in mind. So as far as the DAI price goes, we have to adjust perspectives here for a second. So there is some crazy slippage events on the 10th on Uniswap, a bit on Oasis, but overall, in the last few days, I think this is much more meaningful in terms of pricing. So we're seeing, sort of that sustained $1 kind of price, rising up a little bit into the $2 range. This is more of that sort of steady state situation that we were sort of talking about prior, where in the past we'd seen the DAI price rising up into $1.03, $1.04, sometimes $1.06 during crazy events, especially when yield farming opportunities explode. And then the presupposition was that we'd resume sort of this level when the yields sort of come back down a bit, and that's basically where we're at. We saw fairly large trading volumes for the last 7 days in terms of DAI and ETH, and then also DAI USDC. But I don't want to belabor too much. I think we've gone over the broad strokes, and I think the design is to sort of introduce these points for discussion, then double click on things where we need to. Just one point is, of the 400 or so, 420 million DAI that has been minted, we have roughly 247 million that's locked in the DSR, sort of by virtue of supplying to protocols and then being locked back up. I mean, if we look at Compound, still this is just a lion's share chunk where you have about 250 million in Compound. So that's where basically that number comes from. So this is still dominating what is currently going on in terms of DAI supply. All right, I will stop there and then happy to answer any questions as part of the discussion.
Thank you, Rashesh. Yeah, we'll kind of open things up to kind of general QA questions about anything we've had so far on the call. So feel free to chime in.
I've been emailing back and forth with someone from Gemini about GUSD. So if anyone has any questions that they would like me to pose to them, let me know or hit me on the forum or what have you.
What are the next steps for LRC now that it's failed?
Good question. So I think the first step would be at least attempting to find out why it failed in the first place. Obviously, as Cyrus mentioned, that's somewhat difficult at the moment. There's always at least a chance that whoever voted it down, comes and says something at some point. Other than that, by the MIPS process, you're allowed to resubmit the same proposal or sub-proposal up to 3 times without changes, or without significant changes. So if we wanted to propose it again in the next cycle, we could. I wouldn't kind of suggest doing so until we have some idea of why it was voted down, or someone else, or like some other people, or some other person professing to be a large maker holder says that they want to see it again, like this as an urgency, right? So I'm hoping that kind of answers the question. I mean, I think the other option for it is just if we sort of just wait to see if, there's meaningful changes in either like the liquidity or like, or anything else that would kind of affect risk parameters in some way, could potentially trigger like a reevaluation. But I don't think that's something that is going to like happen immediately, right? Anyone have anything else? It doesn't have to necessarily be related to this call, to anything that's come up so far. Does anyone have other questions or concerns or comments? Aaron suggested yams as a topic. Does anybody want to go down that road? Aaron is now backpedaling.
So do we have any idea how we can get more participation in voting? Encourage more people to vote. Hopefully when there is no YAM 2.0.
Yeah, so there's a couple. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say that one of the things that I've seen some folks complain about is the cost associated with voting, and I've also seen this in like another governance voting projects. So it's kind of a new hurdle that I think we're going to have to confront, especially for kind of like small MKR token holders. I don't know what we can do about it, but just food for thought.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like gas prices are going to prevent most small maker holders from voting, I would think. One thing is I believe like Derek from the foundation is working on a new version of the governance dashboard, which I believe, but don't quote me, will include batch voting. So you'll be able to vote for multiple things in one transaction. So that might help alleviate that somewhat, at least. I think there's been a couple of like forum posts recently about talking about this issue as well. I think like LPro posted one, kind of asking whether the community or the protocol should reimburse voters for the transaction fees incurred when voting. And I'm not entirely sure how that would work in practice, but it's worth discussing, right?
Yeah, I think obviously the loop ring LRC is a big, for me anyway, it's a big disappointment that it didn't get approved, right? Specifically because people put in some time and work into it. And yeah, and I think it was 6 individuals and 1 individual with 17,000 MKR that made a decision, like Cyrus said. And I'm not going to give my opinion, but I think that we need to encourage more people to participate in the polls and somehow encourage them, whether there's high gas fees or if we move to an L2, just to get them out there to vote, or even post their opinion on the forum, right? The reason why they didn't vote or reason why they voted. I don't know.
Yeah, I think those are kind of all good suggestions, and it's the sort of thing where I think, or at least I hope, that like things like this happening will kind of help larger maker holders realize that if they don't vote for stuff like collateral onboarding, things like that, then there's a chance that they just like won't happen, right? So yeah, I mean, I kind of agree that it is disappointing to see LRC fail after the work was done, especially considering it passed the green light poll originally. But I mean, there's always the chance of this happening, right? Like if someone would like to see an asset onboarded in principle, but when seeing like the output of the risk evaluation or the smart contracts evaluation or the oracle's evaluation, then kind of decides that actually, maybe that's not the best idea, right? That's always like a possibility, and it's like a valid like thing to decide, right? So Aaron asked in the side chat what was wrong with doing signed transactions for governance polls, and I actually don't know. I would have to defer to someone else. I haven't thought about it. Josh, have you got a mic? Do you want to say that? Or?
Yeah. Hello?
Hello? Yep, hear you.
Cool. Yeah, I was just going to say that it's something we've explored, and it was actually kind of what we thought we'd do the first time. The only thing you lose is censorship resistance. So whoever's aggregating those signatures can censor something. But what we're exploring now is actually a case where you do that in the happy path, where you send messages, and if somebody thinks they're being censored, then they go to on-chain. So it's more of a fallback.
Cool. That sounds potentially great. Cool. All right, I think 1:15 we will call the meeting there. So thank you everyone that took the time out of their busy days to take part. And I hope to see many of you next week. So thank you everyone.
Bye.